Like a flower that blooms, then fades away, all things are impermanent, in constant sway. These words from the Buddha remind us of the very essence of existence. The universe, much like the flower, is ever-changing. It is a beautiful and profound truth. A truth that is central not only to Buddhism but also to the way we view our lives and the cosmos. Welcome, friends, to this journey into the heart of Buddhist philosophy. Today, we will explore the universe through the lens of impermanence, a key teaching that has shaped Buddhist understanding for over 2 millennia. The world around us, the very fabric of existence, is in a constant state of flux. Nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change, from the smallest grain of sand to the vast expanse of the stars. Everything is interconnected in this dance of transformation. As you sit here, I invite you to reflect on this simple truth. Life is fleeting. Yet, within this fleeting nature lies a deep sense of peace and understanding. Buddhism teaches us that impermanence is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It is through understanding impermanence that we come closer to liberation, closer to the truth that all things, including ourselves, are part of a grand cosmic cycle. But what does this really mean? What is the significance of impermanence in our daily lives? And how does it relate to the universe? To begin, let us reflect on the nature of time itself. The universe, in all its vastness, is constantly changing, evolving in ways that are beyond human comprehension. But we, as sentient beings, often forget that we too are part of this cosmic flow. Just as the seasons change, just as the stars are born and fade away, so too do our lives. Our thoughts, our emotions, and our bodies, all of it is impermanent. And yet, we often live as if we are immune to this truth. In Buddhism, we understand that the awareness of impermanence leads to the wisdom of detachment. It is through this wisdom that we come to realize that attachment to anything, whether it's our possessions, relationships, or even our own identity, brings suffering. The more we cling to these things, the more we suffer when they inevitably change or fade away. So, as we embark on this journey through the teachings of Buddhism and the cosmos, let us open our minds to the beauty of impermanence. Let us understand that the very nature of existence is to change, to grow, and to transform, and in that transformation, there is liberation. Now, let us dive deeper into the core teaching of Buddhism, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. For in understanding the impermanence of all things, we come to grasp the profound truth of the universe itself. To begin, let us reflect on a central concept in Buddhism, anicca, which translates to impermanence. This is not merely a philosophical idea but a profound reality that governs all aspects of existence. Anicca tells us that everything is in a state of constant change. Nothing in this world is fixed. All things come into being, exist for a time, and eventually dissolve. Take a moment to consider the natural world around you. The trees you see, the rivers you hear flowing, the clouds drifting by, all of these are fleeting. Their form, their essence, is not eternal. Every leaf that falls from a tree is a reminder that nothing stays the same. Every sunset reminds us that the day is fleeting, and tomorrow is never promised. This is the essence of anicca. Everything we experience in the physical world is impermanent. And it is not just the tangible things around us that are subject to change. Our emotions, our thoughts, even our very identities, all of these are also impermanent. The Buddha taught us that attachment to these ever-changing phenomena leads to suffering, because we desperately try to hold on to things that cannot be held. Now, let's expand this idea beyond our individual lives. When we look at the universe, it too follows this rule of impermanence. The stars, planets, galaxies, all of them are born, live, and die in a never-ending cosmic cycle. The Buddha's teachings invite us to step back from our narrow, self-centered view of the world and see the grander cosmic truth. Everything in this universe, from the most minute particle to the vastest galaxy, is governed by impermanence. The kalpa is a term in Buddhist cosmology that refers to an enormous period of time, a cycle of creation, preservation, and dissolution. One kalpa is so vast it's almost beyond comprehension. Just as we see the birth and death of stars, the same cycle happens in our lives and in the world around us. Though it may seem to us as if things are static, as if the world is fixed, but in reality, nothing is fixed. Consider the very nature of time. Time is not linear in the Buddhist understanding, it is cyclical. Just as night follows day, seasons change, and generations come and go. The universe itself is in constant motion, endlessly cycling through birth, death, and rebirth. This cyclical nature of existence is not something to fear but to embrace. It is through this recognition of change and impermanence that we can begin to find peace. In Buddhist meditation, we are often encouraged to reflect on the impermanent nature of all things. By focusing on this truth, we are able to cultivate a deeper understanding of the world and a deeper sense of inner peace. By recognizing the impermanence of our thoughts, we can detach from the mental distractions that keep us from seeing reality as it is. By acknowledging the impermanence of our emotions, we can free ourselves from the ups and downs that often control our lives. We are reminded that just as we cannot hold onto a passing cloud, we cannot hold onto our fleeting moments. The more we try, the more we suffer. Instead, Buddhism teaches us to accept impermanence, not with despair, but with wisdom and compassion. It is this acceptance that leads us to liberation, as we no longer tie ourselves to the transitory nature of things. Let us take a moment now to reflect on the impermanence that is present in our daily lives. Think of the people around you, the relationships you cherish, the things that make up your world. All of these are impermanent, and yet, they hold deep meaning. By understanding that nothing is permanent, we can come to appreciate the beauty of each moment. We can learn to live fully, without fear, without attachment, embracing the flow of life as it is, in all its fleeting beauty. Now, let's dive deeper into one of the most profound aspects of Buddhist cosmology: the cyclical nature of the universe and life. We've just explored the idea of impermanence, and this leads us naturally to the understanding that everything in the universe, not just our individual lives, but the very fabric of existence itself, is part of a larger cycle. This is a fundamental teaching in Buddhism. Life and the universe are not linear processes, but rather a continual cycle of birth, decay, death, and rebirth. This concept of cycles, or samsara, is central to understanding both the universe and our place within it. We often think of life as a straight line, with a clear beginning, middle, and end. But in Buddhist philosophy, life is more like a wheel that turns endlessly. This wheel of existence, known as the wheel of Dharma, represents the eternal flow of life, death, and rebirth, an unbroken cycle that affects all beings in the universe. Imagine for a moment that you are standing on a mountain, gazing out at the horizon. You see the sunrise, the day unfolds, and then the sunset marks the end of another day. The next morning, the sun rises again, and this cycle repeats itself, day after day, year after year, eon after eon. This is just one example of how cyclical time works. But the same pattern exists at all levels. From the tiny grains of sand that shift in the wind to the vast cosmic bodies that dance across the universe. Everything operates in cycles. In Buddhist teachings, we understand that this cyclical nature is not just about the physical world. It extends to our spiritual journey as well. Our lives themselves are part of an ongoing cycle, samsara, where we experience birth, growth, suffering, death, and, if we are not liberated, rebirth into another cycle. This cycle continues endlessly until we achieve nirvana, the state of liberation from the cycle of birth and death. The Buddha taught that the key to breaking free from the cycle of samsara is understanding the nature of the cycle itself. Just as a wheel turns, life turns in cycles. This turning is often driven by the three poisons: greed, hatred, and ignorance. These poisons keep us trapped in a cycle of suffering, as we become attached to things that are impermanent, causing us to cling, fight, and act out of delusion. When we recognize the cyclical nature of existence, we begin to see how deeply interconnected everything is. It's not just that we live and die, it's that our actions, our thoughts, our very way of being is part of a larger movement that spans beyond this lifetime. Each moment is linked to the next in an endless chain. Our present is shaped by our past, and our future will be shaped by our present actions. For instance, when we experience suffering in our lives, we may ask, "Why me?" We may feel trapped in a situation that seems inescapable. But in the Buddhist worldview, suffering is not a punishment, it is a natural part of the cycle of life. It is a manifestation of the three marks of existence: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. These three qualities define our experience of life. And by understanding them, we can begin to see that our suffering is not personal, it is part of the universal cycle. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to accept this reality, to look at it not with despair but with wisdom. By accepting that life is cyclical, that suffering is an inevitable part of existence, we can stop resisting it. Resistance is what keeps the wheel of samsara turning. When we learn to observe life without attachment, without fear, and without the desire to change what is inevitable, we begin to transcend the cycle. This is the path to freedom, the path to enlightenment. Imagine the universe itself as a vast and endless ocean. We, as individual beings, are like drops of water within that ocean. Our drops may seem small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they are never separate from the whole. Just as the ocean is constantly moving, with waves crashing and retreating, so too is our life part of a greater cosmic flow. We come, we go, but the ocean remains, ever changing, ever flowing, never the same, and yet always the same. In this way, the cyclical nature of the universe teaches us to be at peace with the ebb and flow of our own lives. When we experience hardship, we remember that this too shall pass. When we encounter joy, we remember that this too is fleeting. By seeing life as a cycle, we can live with more equanimity, knowing that both good and bad times are just phases within a larger movement of the universe. Let us take a moment to reflect on our own lives. Can we begin to see our daily struggles, our successes, and our failures as part of this vast cosmic cycle? Can we find peace in the knowledge that nothing lasts forever, and that each moment, however difficult or beautiful, is just a passing wave in the ocean of existence? As we explore the cyclical nature of the universe and life, we inevitably arrive at one of the most profound truths of existence. Death. Death is a concept that many of us avoid, fear, or resist. It can seem like the ultimate end, the cessation of everything we know and love. But in Buddhist teachings, death is not the end. It is simply a transition, a part of the great cycle that we all must undergo. The Buddha often spoke about the impermanence of life. Anicca, or impermanence, is one of the core teachings of Buddhism. Everything is in a constant state of flux. From our bodies to our thoughts, to the world around us, nothing stays the same. The very breath we take now will never be the same breath again. And when we fully realize this truth, we see that death is just as natural and inevitable as birth. When we speak of life and death, we are referring to more than just the biological processes. These are not simply moments in time when a body ceases to function. In Buddhism, life and death are seen as part of the same continuous process, the endless cycle of samsara, in the same way that we see the birth of a flower and the eventual death of its petals. We must understand that death is not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be accepted as part of the natural flow of life. The Buddha's teachings on death are rooted in the understanding that attachment to life, or more specifically, attachment to our own idea of self, is the cause of suffering. We fear death because we cling to the illusion of permanence, to the idea that we are fixed, unchanging beings. This attachment to the self creates a sense of ownership, a feeling that we possess our lives, our bodies, and everything around us. But as we've learned, nothing is permanent. Death, therefore, is not an enemy, but a teacher, showing us the truth of impermanence and urging us to let go of our attachments. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there is a meditation called Maranasati, which is the contemplation of death. This practice is not intended to make us morbid or fearful, but to bring us face to face with the reality of death. By contemplating death, we can overcome our fear of it. We begin to see that, rather than being something to avoid or deny, death is an invitation to live more fully in the present moment. It reminds us that time is precious and that everything we hold dear is temporary. The Buddha also spoke of rebirth in his teachings. In the cycle of samsara, death is followed by rebirth, not in the sense of reincarnation as we might traditionally understand it, but as a continuation of the process of life. In every moment, our actions, our thoughts, and our intentions create the conditions for what comes next. Our actions today shape our future, both in this life and in the next. Just as a tree bears fruit after its blossoms fade, so too do the seeds of our past actions determine the future conditions of our rebirth. In the sutras, we are reminded that it is not our physical body that defines us, but our actions and intentions, our karma. Karma is the law of cause and effect, the principle that every action has consequences. What we sow, we reap. In this way, even though we may experience death in this life, the energy of our actions carries on, influencing the next phase of existence. This brings us to one of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism, letting go. Death teaches us to let go of our attachments, not just to life itself, but to our ideas, possessions, and even to the ego that we so often cling to. When we let go of our attachments, we are free from fear, free from the need to control, and free from the suffering that comes from resistance to the natural flow of life. If we could truly understand and accept that death is not the end, but a continuation of the cycle, we would live with much less fear and anxiety. We would approach life with greater mindfulness, knowing that each moment is precious, each breath a gift, and in doing so, we would be better prepared to face the inevitable transition from this life to the next. Consider the metaphor of a river. A river is always flowing, moving, changing. The water that rushes past us is never the same from one moment to the next. But does the river ever die? No, it simply changes form. The water flows into the ocean, evaporates, forms clouds, and then falls back to earth as rain, and the cycle continues. In this way, our lives are like the river, flowing, changing, and never really ending. The energy of our lives moves on, but we are not attached to the forms we inhabit. We are the flow itself. In Buddhist teachings, death is seen as an opportunity for transformation. When we die, we leave behind the physical body, but our consciousness, our awareness, continues. The teachings say that the mind is what carries us from one life to the next, that our thoughts, actions, and intentions form the very substance of our future lives. This means that, in each moment, we have the power to shape our future, not just in this life, but in future rebirths. Now that we've discussed the relationship between life and death, we come to one of the most profound aspects of Buddhist philosophy: liberation and nirvana. In the Buddhist tradition, liberation from suffering, or what we call nirvana, is the ultimate goal. It is the state where we transcend the cycle of life and death, and no longer experience the suffering that comes with impermanence. But what does it mean to be liberated? And how does one achieve nirvana? To begin, let us consider the nature of suffering. In the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha teaches that suffering, or dukkha, is a fundamental part of existence. It arises because we are attached to things that are impermanent: our bodies, our relationships, our possessions, and even our thoughts. These attachments cause us to cling to things that are destined to change, and this clinging creates suffering. Now, suffering is not inherently negative. In fact, suffering can be a powerful teacher. It shows us where we are attached, where we are resisting the natural flow of life. But if we stay in a state of attachment and ignorance, we will continue to suffer. The goal, then, is not to avoid suffering, but to transcend it. We do not seek to eliminate suffering entirely, but to transform our relationship to it. This transformation is the path to nirvana. Nirvana is not a place, nor is it a state of oblivion. It is the experience of complete freedom from the bonds of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It is the state of enlightenment, where the mind is free from all attachments, desires, and delusions. When we reach nirvana, we no longer cling to the self, the ego, or any external conditions. We are fully present in the moment, accepting the impermanence of all things, and embracing the truth of our interconnectedness with all life. But achieving nirvana requires a deep understanding of the nature of the self and the cessation of desire. According to the Buddha, our suffering arises because we believe in the self, the illusion that there is a permanent, unchanging I that exists apart from everything else. This attachment to the self creates a sense of separation between us and the world around us. We see ourselves as isolated beings, subject to the forces of life and death. But when we let go of the notion of a permanent self, we come to understand that all things are interconnected. There is no true separation between self and other. Nirvana is a state of perfect peace, where we no longer see ourselves as separate from others, but as part of the whole. In this state, there is no desire, no aversion, no fear of death. There is only equanimity, a mind that is at peace, regardless of the circumstances. It is the ultimate freedom. the ultimate liberation from the cycle of samsara. But how do we attain nirvana? The Buddha outlined a practical path for achieving liberation, known as the Noble Eightfold Path. This path consists of 8 practices that help us cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. These practices are right view, understanding the 4 noble truths and the nature of reality; right intention, cultivating thoughts of non-attachment, compassion, and loving kindness; right speech, speaking truthfully and avoiding harmful speech; right action, acting in ways that are ethical, non-harmful, and conducive to well-being; right livelihood, choosing a profession that does not cause harm to others; right effort, striving to cultivate wholesome qualities and abandon unwholesome ones; right mindfulness, being fully present in the moment, observing the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena; right concentration, developing deep concentration through meditation, leading to insight and wisdom. Each step on this path is interconnected, and each practice supports the others. By following the Noble Eightfold Path, we gradually reduce our attachment to the self, cultivate a compassionate heart, and develop the wisdom necessary to see things as they truly are. But achieving nirvana is not an instant process. It requires consistent effort and practice over a long period of time. It is a journey of transformation, a journey that involves both understanding and experience. The more we cultivate the qualities of wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline, the more we can let go of our attachments and experience true freedom. One way to understand nirvana is to think of it as awakening, waking up from the dream of the self and seeing reality as it truly is. Imagine you've been in a dream for a long time, and when you finally wake up, you realize that the things you were attached to, the fears you had, and the desires you chased, were all just illusions. When you wake up, you no longer need to fear death, because you understand that it was never real in the first place. It was just another dream, another cycle of samsara. In the Theravada tradition, nirvana is described as the ultimate goal of the Buddhist teachings. It is the cessation of all suffering, the end of the cycle of birth and death. But in the Mahayana tradition, nirvana is seen as a state of compassion. It is not just the end of personal suffering, but the realization that all beings are interconnected, and that true freedom comes from helping others to be liberated as well. In this sense, nirvana is not just an individual attainment, but a collective one. It is the ultimate realization that when we liberate ourselves, we also liberate others. So, death is not something to be feared or avoided. It is simply a part of the natural cycle of life, a transition from one form to another. And when we understand the nature of death, we also understand the true nature of life. We realize that liberation and nirvana are not distant concepts, but achievable in this very moment, through our actions, our thoughts, and our intentions. To die is to let go, and in that letting go, we experience the ultimate liberation, the ultimate freedom from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In this freedom, we find peace, joy, and a deep connection to all beings. In the previous sections, we've explored the profound teachings of impermanence, the nature of life and death, and the ultimate goal of liberation and nirvana. But one essential element that connects all these teachings is the realization that everything is interconnected. The universe, human beings, and phenomena do not exist in isolation. They exist as part of a vast and dynamic web of relationships. To understand the interaction between these levels of existence, we must first recognize that in Buddhism, the universe is not a static place. It is constantly in flux, in a perpetual state of transformation. The Buddha taught that all things arise due to causes and conditions, and they exist interdependently. This is the principle of dependent origination. Everything that exists depends on something else for its existence. But how does this principle apply to the universe, to human beings, and to phenomena in our daily lives? The universe, in Buddhist cosmology, the universe is not just a collection of stars, planets, and galaxies. It is a living, breathing organism, constantly undergoing cycles of creation and destruction. The kalpa, or cosmic cycle, is a fundamental concept in Buddhism that describes the infinite, cyclical nature of existence. Just as individual beings are born, live, and die, the universe itself undergoes cycles of birth, decay, and rebirth. This cosmic dance is not random. It follows natural laws, and it is driven by the same forces that shape our lives. impermanence, suffering, and change. But what is particularly striking about Buddhist cosmology is its emphasis on the fact that everything is connected. The universe does not exist in a vacuum, it is part of an interconnected web of existence, where each element influences the others. The birth and death of stars, the movement of planets, the evolution of life, all of these phenomena are part of a larger cosmic cycle that mirrors the cycle of life and death in the individual. Human beings. Now, let's consider the role of human beings in this vast, interconnected universe. We, too, are not isolated entities. We are part of the larger web of existence. Our thoughts, actions, and intentions create ripples in the world around us. In Buddhism, there is a concept known as karma, the law of cause and effect. Karma teaches that every action, whether positive or negative, has consequences. Our actions influence not only our own lives but also the lives of others, and ultimately the world itself. This idea of karma is tied to the Buddhist understanding of interconnectedness. It is not just our physical actions that create karma, but also our mental states, our desires, and our attachments. The Buddha taught that we must cultivate mindfulness and awareness of our actions and intentions in order to break the cycle of negative karma and cultivate positive states of mind that contribute to the well-being of ourselves and others. In this context, human beings are not passive spectators of the universe. We are active participants in its unfolding. Our thoughts and actions are woven into the fabric of the universe, contributing to the larger cosmic processes of creation and destruction. The more we cultivate wisdom and compassion, the more we align ourselves with the natural flow of the universe, creating harmony within ourselves and with the world around us. Phenomena. Lastly, let's consider the role of phenomena, the countless objects, experiences, and occurrences that we encounter in our daily lives. In Buddhism, all phenomena are seen as impermanent, empty of inherent existence, and interdependent. This means that nothing exists on its own, independent of everything else. Every phenomenon arises due to a combination of conditions, and when those conditions change, the phenomenon ceases to exist. For example, think about the experience of joy. Joy does not exist independently, it arises when certain conditions are present. A pleasant experience, a loving relationship, a sense of accomplishment. But when those conditions change, the joy fades away. In this way, joy is impermanent, and it depends on external circumstances for its existence. This is true for all phenomena, whether they are mental, physical, or emotional. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to reflect on the impermanence of all phenomena and to cultivate a deep understanding of the nature of reality. By recognizing the impermanence of our experiences, we can develop a sense of detachment, not in the sense of withdrawing from life, but in the sense of no longer clinging to things that are fleeting and transient. This detachment allows us to experience life more fully, without being consumed by attachment or fear. The interconnectedness of the universe, human beings, and phenomena highlights a key insight of Buddhism, that all things are empty of inherent existence, and that everything exists in a constant state of flux and interdependence. By understanding this, we can begin to cultivate wisdom and compassion, which are the keys to breaking free from the cycle of samsara and achieving nirvana. So, as we live our lives, we must remember that our actions and thoughts have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the entire world. We are all part of the same interconnected web, and our actions, no matter how small, have an impact. This understanding is essential for living a life that is in harmony with the universe and that contributes to the well-being of all beings. Now that we have explored the fundamental teachings of impermanence, the cycles of life, and the interconnectedness of all beings and phenomena, we come to an essential question that arises from these teachings. How can we find meaning in a world that is constantly changing? This is a question that has troubled humanity for millennia. In a world where everything is fleeting, where life itself is impermanent, how can we create meaning and purpose in our lives? In Buddhism, the answer to this question is not to deny the reality of impermanence, but to embrace it. The Buddha taught that our search for meaning should not be rooted in attachment to things that will eventually fade away, whether they be material possessions, relationships, or even our own physical bodies. Instead, the path to finding meaning lies in understanding the nature of impermanence and how it shapes our experiences. The Buddhist teaching of anicca, or impermanence, encourages us to recognize that everything, from the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, is in a constant state of flux. The world is always changing, and so are we. This understanding can bring about a deep sense of peace, because when we recognize that nothing is permanent, we are no longer consumed by the fear of loss or the desire for things to remain the same. We come to see that all things are transitory, and that is their very nature. But how does this help us find meaning? In Buddhism, meaning is not something that can be found in the external world. It is not something that can be bought, achieved, or attained. Meaning is something that arises from within us when we begin to understand the true nature of reality. When we accept the impermanence of all things, we can begin to focus on the one thing that is constant, our own mind. The Buddha taught that the mind is the source of all suffering and all liberation. Our attachment to impermanent things creates suffering, because we cling to things that are bound to change. But when we train the mind to understand the nature of impermanence, to see things as they truly are, we can break free from the cycle of attachment and suffering. This is where meditation becomes essential. Meditation is the practice of calming and focusing the mind, so that we can see the world clearly and understand its true nature. Through meditation, we can cultivate mindfulness, which is the ability to be fully present in each moment without attachment or aversion. When we practice mindfulness, we begin to see that everything is in constant flux, that no thought, feeling, or experience is permanent. This realization frees us from the tyranny of desire and helps us find peace amidst the chaos of life. The search for meaning in impermanence also involves the cultivation of wisdom. Wisdom, in the Buddhist sense, is not about accumulating knowledge or information, but about understanding the nature of reality. It is about seeing things as they truly are, without the filters of our desires, prejudices, and attachments. Wisdom allows us to see the interconnectedness of all things, and to recognize that our actions, no matter how small, have an impact on the world around us. But wisdom alone is not enough. In order to find true meaning, we must also cultivate compassion. Compassion is the natural expression of wisdom. When we understand that all beings are subject to the same laws of impermanence, we naturally develop a deep sense of empathy and kindness towards others. We recognize that all beings are struggling with the same existential questions, and that our actions can help alleviate their suffering. Compassion allows us to see beyond our own desires and concerns, and to act in ways that benefit all beings. In this way, meaning is not something that we find by seeking external rewards or achievements. It is something that we create through our thoughts, words, and actions. By embracing impermanence, cultivating mindfulness and wisdom, and acting with compassion, we can create a life that is meaningful and fulfilling, no matter how fleeting it may be. The search for meaning in impermanence is a deeply personal journey. It is not a destination to be reached, but a path to be walked. And as we walk this path, we come to realize that the meaning we seek has always been within us. It is found in the way we live our lives, in the way we treat others, and in the way we relate to the world around us. So, rather than searching for meaning in things that are temporary, we are encouraged to search for it within ourselves. We are reminded that our true purpose is not to cling to the impermanent, but to embrace the present moment and live in accordance with the natural flow of the universe. In the end, it is not the things we acquire or the achievements we attain that give our lives meaning. It is the way we live in harmony with the impermanence of the world, the way we show kindness and compassion to others, and the way we cultivate wisdom and peace within our own hearts. As we come to the end of this exploration of impermanence, cycles, and the search for meaning, it's important to take a step back and reflect on the key insights we've uncovered. After all, teachings in Buddhism are not meant to be learned and left behind. They are meant to be lived and practiced. In this final part, I invite you to pause and consider, how can we apply the wisdom of impermanence in our daily lives? How can we take these teachings from the realm of theory and integrate them into the moments of our existence? The Buddha's insight into impermanence is not meant to fill us with despair or nihilism, but with liberation. It offers us freedom from attachment, from the fear of loss, and from the compulsion to hold on to what is fleeting. The impermanence of life, when viewed correctly, is not a source of suffering, but a gateway to freedom. Life lessons from the Buddhist view of impermanence. Live fully in the present moment. The first life lesson that emerges from the realization of impermanence is to live fully in the present moment. When we understand that every moment is precious because it is fleeting, we can shift our attention from the past and future to the now. We no longer need to dwell on past regrets or future anxieties. Instead, we can live with awareness and presence, appreciating each moment as it comes, because we know it will not last forever. This doesn't mean living recklessly or without thought for the future, but it does mean living with intention, free from the heavy burden of clinging to things that are bound to change. Cultivate equanimity in the face of change. Another lesson is the cultivation of equanimity, a balanced, calm mind in the face of life's changes. Impermanence teaches us that everything is subject to change, including our circumstances, emotions, and relationships. When we are able to accept this, we can develop a sense of inner stability and peace. This peace comes not from resisting change, but from accepting it as a natural part of existence. Equanimity is not about suppressing our emotions or pretending that change doesn't affect us. It is about acknowledging the change and responding to it with wisdom and composure. Rather than reacting with fear or attachment, release attachments and embrace freedom. One of the core teachings of Buddhism is the idea of non-attachment. While we often associate attachment with love or affection, Buddhism teaches that attachment leads to suffering. When we attach ourselves to things, people, or even ideas, we set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment and pain. Because all things are impermanent, the practice of releasing attachment doesn't mean we should abandon our responsibilities or relationships. Rather, it means approaching life with the understanding that nothing is permanent and nothing belongs to us. We can love, care, and nurture, but we do so with an open hand, not a clenched fist. This allows us to experience the joys of life without the burden of attachment. Embrace the interconnectedness of all things. Impermanence also brings us to an awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. When we recognize that everything is constantly changing, we come to understand that nothing exists in isolation. We are all part of a larger, ever-changing web of existence. This understanding nurtures a deep sense of compassion, as we see that all beings, just like us, are subject to the same forces of birth, decay, and death. This interconnectedness also brings a sense of responsibility. Our actions, no matter how small, ripple through the world, affecting others in ways we may not always see. The recognition of impermanence can inspire us to act with kindness, to treat others with respect, and to contribute to the well-being of the world around us. Find meaning beyond the material. Finally, the greatest lesson impermanence teaches us is that true meaning cannot be found in material possessions, success, or external accomplishments. These things, by their very nature, are transient. No matter how hard we try to hold on to them, they will eventually fade away. The real meaning of life comes from within. It comes from understanding the nature of our mind, cultivating wisdom, practicing compassion, and living in harmony with the impermanent nature of the world. By focusing on the things that are lasting, our virtues, our relationships, and our inner peace, we can find fulfillment and purpose, regardless of how much time we have. A final thought: embracing the impermanence of life. As we conclude, I encourage you to reflect on the impermanence of your own life. The things you are attached to, the goals you are chasing, and the people you hold dear, they too will change. This is not something to fear, but something to accept and understand. Embrace the impermanence of life as an invitation to live more fully, love more deeply, and practice with greater urgency. When we accept impermanence, we are no longer at odds with the world. We begin to flow with the natural rhythms of life, embracing the beauty in each moment, and realizing that everything is part of a greater cycle of birth, decay, and renewal. So, as we face the challenges of life, let us do so with the wisdom that impermanence brings. Let us be mindful of our actions, compassionate towards others, and at peace with the fleeting nature of all things. May you find peace in the impermanence of life, and may this understanding guide you toward a deeper sense of meaning and purpose.